exercise different powers in foreign relations and set our foreign policy? Well, we know the president is a figurehead for our country, right? We've seen that is one of the reasons we wanted a unitary executive, and why ultimately the Constitution created a unitary executive was to have this figurehead for not just domestic politics, but also foreign relations. However, Congress was also given substantial power in foreign affairs. And right, this makes sense. We know that the branches were given the power to check and balance each other. And even though we've primarily looked at domestic affairs in this class, we'll see that it's no different for foreign relations. Now, different branches play different roles depending on what the output is, depending on what kinds of policies or laws are actually being made. So the budget, for example, how we fund things like foreign aid, or pay for equipment for our troops who are stationed abroad. The budget. Well, the president proposes a budget. We know that the Budget Act says that the president will propose the initial budget. But Congress still has to authorize the budget, can make any changes they want to the budget the president proposes, and ultimately send it back to the president for his signature or veto. And from there, right, it's basically routine lawmaking. The exception of the president is the one to submit that sort of initial proposal. Treaties. The president typically is the one to negotiate the treaties, or his bureaucrats, right? Members of the State Department typically. And those treaties are negotiated and ratified by the president. Ratification just means signing it into law. But Congress has a lot to say. Typically, it's the Senate advising and consenting, the 2/3 majority. But this is not always the case. Sometimes there are things like fast track authority granted to the president, which reduces the numbers needed to just a simple majority. So we can see that this changes depending on what Congress is willing to sort of delegate to the president. But for the most part, the president negotiates and ratifies, and Congress has to advise and consent, a bit like the appointment of justices. Executive agreements are a bit different. Kind of like executive orders, they don't need congressional approval. The president negotiates them and approves them, and that's it. But just like executive agreements, executive orders, my mistake, executive orders, executive agreements are not funded, right? Because we know Congress is in charge of the purse strings. So the president will need Congress ultimately to appropriate funds through the budget process if the executive agreement needs any sort of funding. The declaration of war, right? That sort of ultimate expression of hard power. It can be proposed by the president, but Congress has to actually be the one to declare war. They are the ones who ultimately do that. Use of force. So that would be military force, but without an actual declaration of war. That can be carried out by the president as commander-in-chief of the armed forces for 60 days. But because of the War Powers Act, at 60 days, the president must either bring the troops home or have the action be extended by Congress. And he must actually notify Congress earlier, so they have a little bit of time before that 60 days runs out. So Congress would approve any extended operations. And of course, Congress is still providing the funding for these troops in the first place. Now, on the more soft power side, things like ambassadors or diplomats, they're chosen by the president. The president nominates them, but the Senate advises and consents. This is a simple majority. Again, just like for appointing justices to the federal court system. The president nominates the candidates and the Senate advises and consents. So we can see that these different outputs all have some interaction between the president and Congress. This policy can't just be made by one branch. One thing that's not on this list is regular law. Sometimes regular laws can affect foreign policy, but those, as we know, are proposed by Congress, passed through both chambers of Congress, and ultimately given to the president for his signature or veto. so that that kind of regular law, which could affect our foreign policy, is just made through the regular lawmaking process.